Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. Let's begin by taking up an editorial from page number 6. This editorial deals with the office of the Deputy Speaker of the Lok Sabha. So first let's talk about the office of the Deputy Speaker in detail. See, this topic is in news because the constitutional office of the Deputy Speaker of the Lok Sabha has remained vacant for nearly 15 months. It has been nearly 1.5 years since the 17th Lok Sabha was elected, and since then a Deputy Speaker has not been chosen to preside over the functionings of the Lok Sabha. Instead, as mandated by the Constitution, a panel of MPs have been assisting the Speaker in discharging his functions. See, Article 93 of the Indian Constitution provides for the office of the Speaker and as well as the Deputy Speaker of the Lok Sabha. This article defines as to how the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker of the Lok Sabha shall be elected after a new Lok Sabha has been constituted. As per the article, the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker are elected amongst the members of the House with a simple majority. So while the constitutional office of the Speaker of the Lok Sabha plays a critical role in the discharge of parliamentary business, the office of the Deputy Speaker is more symbolic in a parliamentary democracy and it lacks any definitive authority. To understand why the office of the Deputy Speaker is more symbolic of a parliamentary democracy and why it lacks any real authority, you need to look at the roles and functions of the Deputy Speaker. See, the Deputy Speaker of the lower house acts as the presiding officer of the House in case of leave or absence caused by the death or illness of the Speaker of the Lok Sabha. So he basically discharges the same functions as that of the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, but only during his absence that might be caused because of illness, death, etc. The other significant function of the Deputy Speaker is to receive the resignation letter of the Speaker of the House in case the Speaker chooses to step down from his position. Apart from this, the Deputy Speaker does not enjoy any special powers on his own, and hence his office, the constitutional office, is seen to be more symbolic of a parliamentary democracy that provides for continuation of parliamentary business, and hence it has not been provided with any distinctive authority. Then also note that once the Deputy Speaker has been elected, he need not resign from his original party, but however, he is expected to remain impartial in his functioning. So as per the laid down procedures and rules of the House, the Deputy Speaker is usually elected in the very first meeting of the Lok Sabha after the general elections, along with the election of the Speaker of the House. As mandated by the Constitution, both the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker are elected from amongst the members of the Lok Sabha, but however, a unique convention has been evolved in the Indian Parliament, according to which the office of the Speaker usually goes to an MP from the ruling party, and usually the ruling party chooses a senior member who enjoys wide consensus amongst all the parties of the House. Then as per the convention, the office of the Deputy Speaker is offered by the ruling party to an opposition party in the interest of ensuring the healthy functioning of the parliamentary democracy. Then if you look at the tenure and the removal process of the Deputy Speaker, the Deputy Speaker gets to hold his office till the entire term of the Lok Sabha, unless and until he ceases to be a member of the House prior to that, or he offers his resignation prior to the end of the term of the House. Then the Deputy Speaker can also be removed from his position by a resolution passed in the Lok Sabha with a simple majority amongst its members. But despite this nominal role played by the Deputy Speaker, this constitutional office plays a key role in the parliamentary democracy because it provides a fair representation to the opposition parties in order to ensure that their voices are heard. But contrary to this established convention in the Indian Parliament, in the 17th Lok Sabha, the office of the Deputy Speaker has remained vacant for more than 1.5 years since the 17th Lok Sabha was constituted in May 2019 after the last general elections. The editorial points out that few opposition parties have brought up this issue with the Speaker of the House, and they have demanded the ruling party to follow the convention and offer the office of the Deputy Speaker to the opposition parties. But however, the Speaker of the House has remained non-committal over the last few months, and this has triggered a major controversy ahead of the monsoon session of the Parliament. So in this context, the editorial points out that just because the ruling party enjoys an overwhelming majority in the Lok Sabha, it should not disregard the opposition and it has an obligation to abide by established parliamentary conventions. Because according to the editorial, following such parliamentary conventions is integral to ensuring parliamentary accountability of the executive. So in this context, the editorial is calling upon the ruling party and the government to engage with the opposition and make a course correction by offering the office of the Deputy Speaker as per established convention to the opposition parties. But however, there is also a need for the opposition parties to remain coherent and united in their stand, because as of now, very few opposition parties have been bringing up this crucial issue. So in this context, the editorial concludes by saying that the convention of electing the Deputy Speaker from the opposition should be upheld at any cost in the larger interest of parliamentary democracy. Now let's take up another editorial from page number 6, which evaluates the economic slowdown that has been caused by the lockdown, and it suggests a way forward in order to revive economic growth. According to the editorial, the only way forward is for the government to come out with such fiscal policies which can help revive demand and support the creation of demand, which in turn can trigger industrial activity. So let us see how the editorial justifies this argument. First, the editorial provides for a basic assessment of the economic conditions. First, the editorial refers to factory output data that is brought out by the Index of Industrial Production. And according to the IIP index for the month of July, industrial activity has contracted by 10.4%. If you compare this with the contraction of 15.8% seen in June and the massive 33.9% contraction seen in the month of May, the industrial data for the month of July definitely points to better numbers, and it indicates the slow revival of industrial activity. But however, a contraction of 10.4% is still massive, and it points to the depressed stage that the Indian economy has entered into as a direct result of the lockdown. The IIP data for the month of July shows that industrial activity in key sectors such as mining, manufacturing and electricity is yet to pick up, and this is mainly because private consumption has been very weak due to the lack of demand. See, in fact, even before the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown, the Indian economy and its fundamentals were in a weak position, and even then, a low demand situation was driving down industrial productivity. But this lack of demand and this weakness in private consumption has been further aggravated because of the lockdown, and this has caused the manufacturers to produce way below their actual capacity. You look at any sector, be it automobiles, electronics, consumer durables, appliances, textiles, etc., they have all been suffering due to weakness in private consumption and due to lack of demand. Because the lockdown and the pandemic has completely altered the consumption behavior of the consumer, and hence, if industrial activity and production has to be revived, then the government needs to come out with such fiscal policies which can directly stimulate consumer demand and private consumption. Yes, there are a few sectors which have benefited from the pandemic, such as pharmaceuticals, specialty chemicals, botanical products, etc. And these few sectors have seen tremendous growth as a result of the special demand that has been created by the pandemic for these products. But apart from these few green shoots in the economy, the other sectors are suffering immensely, primarily because of the lack of demand, and hence the editorial suggests that the government should capitalize on the upcoming festive season in order to stimulate consumer demand and revive the economy. The editorial substantiates this argument by referring to the Purchasing Managers Index that is brought out by IHS Markit, and this purchasing data collected at the level of purchasing managers across various industries indicates a tentative revival in purchasing in the month of August, and on the basis of this data, if the government stimulates demand through its fiscal policies just ahead of the festive season, then it can help in the revival of industrial activity. Because see, India happens to be the only major economy in the world which has hardly come out with any major fiscal stimulus after the imposition of the COVID-19 lockdown. You look at any other major economy, be it the United States, be it the European countries, and as well as other emerging economies, they have all come out with fiscal measures to address the demand weakness by stimulating consumer demand. But on the other hand, India has come out with just a few half-hearted monetary measures from the RBI, along with very minimal fiscal intervention by the center, which is extremely wary of breaching its fiscal deficit targets. While most major economies are looking to revive demand that has been affected by the lockdown through massive fiscal policies, even at the risk of breaching their fiscal deficit, India is yet to come out with a major fiscal policy that can help revive consumer demand. So in this context, the editorial calls upon the central government to come out with demand-supportive fiscal policies which can help end the economic slowdown that has been induced by the lockdown. Now let's take up a column from page number 6, written by former Chief of the Northern Command of the Indian Army, Lieutenant General D.S. Hooda. In this column, the writer talks about the ongoing border tensions between India and China along the line of actual control, and he evaluates the various border agreements that have been signed between the two countries. See, over the last 3 decades, India and China have signed several border agreements with regard to maintenance of peace and tranquility, especially along the LAC. The first such agreement was signed in 1993, and it introduced a variety of confidence building measures between the two sides along the border areas, and it also formalized the concept of the line of actual control. This agreement, along with the several other agreements that have been signed over the last 3 decades, have helped in the maintenance of peace and tranquility along the LAC, and they have helped in the de-escalation of any border tensions. But however, several experts argue that the current problems between India and China can be traced back to the non-implementation of several provisions of the 1993 agreement, and they also argue that India should have never accepted the term line of actual control because there is no clarity as to what constitutes the LAC, and it is this differing perception which gives rise to frequent border tensions between the two countries. See, following the 1962 conflict, the border between India and China has always been loosely controlled by the armed forces of both the sides. The lack of delineation of the boundary even after the war led to 1967 clashes, which clearly brought out the differences that both the sides had with regard to the definition of the border between the two sides. Then later in 1976, the Indira Gandhi government established the China Study Group in order to provide single point advice to the government on all matters related to China. This classified group basically provides for inter-ministerial coordination amongst various ministries and departments of the government at the level of secretaries. Today, the China Study Group is headed by the National Security Advisor, and under this, the NSA interacts with various key secretaries of the government, including the Cabinet Secretary, the Home Secretary, the Defense Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, along with the Vice Chiefs of the 3 armed forces, and as well as the Directors of the Intelligence Bureau and RAW. The China Study Group has played a key role over the years in defining the patrolling points for the Indian Armed Forces and in guiding the scope of military activities along the LAC. As a result of these guidelines drawn out by the China Study Group, India was able to give a massive response to China during the 1986-87 tensions, which almost brought the two countries again to the brink of conflict. Following these tensions, then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi paid a historic visit to China, which helped in resetting the relationship for the first time after the 1962 war. And from here onwards, both the governments started instilling a series of confidence-building measures in order to de-escalate from any tense situation, and this was first formalized through the 1993 Agreement on Peace and Tranquility that was signed by the then P.V. Narasimha Rao government. As mentioned earlier, this agreement introduced a variety of CBMs to build greater trust and communication between the two armed forces, especially at the border level, and it also formalized the concept of line of actual control. The agreement also recognized the differing perceptions that both the sides had with regard to the delineation of the LAC, but in order to prevent any conflict or tension as a result of these differing perceptions, the 93 agreement mandated both the sides to not use any force along the LAC, and it is because of this agreement that not a single shot had been fired across the border for a number of years. This agreement also placed several restrictions on the two militaries to reduce their exercises near the border, and it also mandated the reduction of military forces along the LAC in order to reduce any confrontation. So under the 93 agreement, a ceiling was laid down for both the militaries with regard to the deployment of their military forces along the border, so that it wouldn't result in any miscalculation. This landmark agreement was followed up by the 1996 agreement, which called for reducing or limiting the military forces to minimum levels, and it also called for the reduction in the deployment of heavy weaponry such as battle tanks, artillery guns, missiles, etc. Then came the 2005 protocol between India and China, which was a result of the friendly relations that were pursued by the Vajpayee government and then later by the Manmohan Singh government. And this helped in the introduction of several other confidence building measures in order to handle any situation that might arise when the two troops came face to face while patrolling the disputed LAC. These face-to-face situations were more likely to occur during this period because both the sides had stepped up their patrolling along the LAC, and as a result of their differing perceptions, there was a higher likelihood of such confrontations from occurring. So in order to ensure that these minor confrontations at the border level doesn't escalate into a bigger conflict, a standard protocol was laid down through this 2005 agreement. So as a result of these agreements, between 1993 and 2010, there was relative peace and tranquility along the LAC, and there were very few cases of intrusions and clashes between the two troops. But as India started adopting a more aggressive approach towards border infrastructure and towards enhancing its military capabilities against China, the frequency of such clashes and intrusions began to go up. For example, in 2006, the then government of India decided to build around 73 strategic roads along the LAC. Then later in 2010, it approved the creation of 2 new mountain divisions in order to strengthen India's deployment, especially in Arunachal Pradesh. Along with this, additional troops were deployed in Ladakh as well. And in 2013, the government approved the raising of a new mountain strike corps that would be capable of carrying out offensive operations against China. So this improvement in border infrastructure on the Indian side and this improvement in India's military capabilities against China led Indian soldiers to frequently patrol the LAC, which until then was sparsely controlled by India. And this resulted in increasing face-offs between the Indian and the Chinese troops, leading to frequent military standoffs between the two countries. This is what explains the intrusion seen in Depsang and Chumar in 2013 and 14 by the Chinese side, because China was increasingly becoming concerned about India's increasing capabilities along the LAC. Then in order to address these concerns, in 2013, the Border Defense Cooperation Agreement was also signed. But according to the writer, this agreement has largely failed to have any real impact on the ground. Then in 2017, when the Doklam dispute broke out, we saw that all these previous agreements of 93, 96, 2005 and 2013 coming into picture, and it provided an opportunity for both India and China to de-escalate and diffuse the crisis. But this time around, tensions in the western sector, that is in the Ladakh region, have acquired more seriousness because according to the writer, key provisions of the 93 agreement have not been implemented by both the sides, and this shows the irreconcilable differences that have emerged between India and China over the fundamental principles of these key border agreements. The writer feels that the current border tensions is a direct outcome of the failure to implement 2 commitments of the 93 agreement, which includes further clarification and resolution of the differing perceptions along the LAC and a subsequent reduction of military forces. Contrary to these commitments made in the 93 agreement, both the countries have stepped up their military forces and military deployment, and they have not taken any steps to clear the differing perceptions. And it is a combination of these 2 factors which is resulting in increasing incidents that is leading to a tense military standoff between the 2 countries. So in the context of the recent 5-point action plan that has been worked out by the 2 foreign ministers, the writer says that if peace and tranquility has to be maintained along the LAC, then both the countries should focus on conflict prevention and not just on the maintenance of peace and tranquility. Because due to increased capabilities on both the sides and due to increased deployment, the chances of a conflict and an escalation remains very high, and merely maintaining peace and tranquility won't be sufficient as long as there are differing perceptions with regard to the demarcation of the LAC. Now let's take up another column from page number 6. In this column, the writers evaluate the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the reproductive health of women and also the vulnerability of pregnant women and fetuses and infants to get affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. See, studies and cases from around the world have clearly shown that the SARS coronavirus 2 causes severe damage to the inner lining of blood vessels. So this would no doubt affect the placenta as well, which is the key source of nourishment for the fetus. And the availability of such evidence, which shows the impact of COVID-19 on pregnant women and on fetuses and infants, should make the government stand up and take notice of this unique impact of the pandemic on the reproductive health of women. Considering that India is going through an exponential phase of community transmission, especially in its hospitals, it is very essential for the government to ensure that pregnant women are protected against the pandemic. And hence, the editorial is calling upon the government to come out with a specific health advisory for women by consulting with the World Health Organization and other countries which are dealing with similar challenges. Now let's take up a column from page number 7 in which the writer evaluates the economic opportunities that arise for Indian IT firms because of the decision of the Indian government to ban Chinese mobile applications and Chinese tech companies from accessing the Indian market. See, as tensions between India and China began to escalate, the Indian government took a decision to ban hundreds of Chinese mobile applications on the grounds of national security and geopolitics. But the writer says that this is not just a geopolitical move, but it also provides India with an opportunity for promoting a strategic trade and economic policy that can help the domestic IT sector meet the domestic demands and requirements. In fact, he says that India can draw lessons from China itself because China's censorship policy over internet not only helped in censoring content which was against the ideologies of the Communist Party, but it also helped insulate Chinese companies and entrepreneurs from the domination of the Western firms, especially the Silicon Valley based big tech companies such as Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, etc. This insulation of China's IT sector is what has enabled Chinese companies to come out with homegrown copycats of Western IT applications and Western IT products. Today, Chinese firms have come up with homegrown versions of Google, such as Baidu. Then China's WeChat functions as the equivalent of WhatsApp and Paytm. Then its Alibaba functions as the equivalent of Amazon, thus providing complete domination to domestic companies over the domestic Chinese market and insulating it from any possible domination and monopoly from the Western tech companies. This strategic trade and economic policy of China, built on geopolitical and national security grounds, has enabled Chinese homegrown companies to seek global domination today. And this is what has enabled Chinese tech companies to make massive advances in the field of artificial intelligence, neural networks, machine learning, deep learning, etc. So for these Chinese companies to further develop these technologies and to further fine-tune them, they needed access to tremendous amounts of data, and this not only comes from their domination of the domestic Chinese market, but they were also looking to tap into the exploding internet market in India. This is what explains the massive push by Chinese tech companies into the Indian market, because millions and millions of Indian citizens were being brought online because of the ongoing telecom and internet revolution in India. But ironically, Indian IT firms which specialize in outsourcing and which provide specialized IT products, especially for foreign clients, they have largely ignored and stayed away from meeting the domestic requirements. It is this gap in India's technology and trade policy that has allowed the Western tech companies, that is the big tech, led by the likes of Facebook, Google, etc., to dominate the Indian market, leaving very little space for Indian firms. The writer predicts that in the future, the Indian market would have been dominated in a similar fashion by Chinese tech firms. So in this context, the ban on Chinese apps and Chinese companies from accessing the Indian market is not just a geopolitical move, but it should also be seen as a strategic trade and economic policy that can help the Indian IT industry to capture the domestic market. He says that Indian IT firms should be encouraged by the government to not just replace these applications such as TikTok, PUBG, etc., but they should be encouraged and incentivized to innovate and come out with quality services that can meet the domestic requirements. Indian IT firms, along with telecom and internet companies and various other startups, they have a tremendous opportunity to explore various sectors, including banking, finance, edutech, e-healthcare, e-commerce, and as well as digital payments. But for these initiatives to succeed, the Indian IT industry has to ensure that it will overcome the barriers posed by language and the regional divide. Any applications and any IT services developed by Indian companies, they need to keep in mind the regional and linguistic diversity of India, and they need to ensure that their products are hyper-local and hyper-regional. It is this approach which will help the Indian IT firms to scale up their services and their technology and to reach out to a massive audience that can in turn help the Indian IT sector to establish dominance not just in the Indian market but also in the global market, just like the Chinese companies and the American companies have done. Now let's take up the practice questions for today. Which of the following statements are correct? Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary in Kerala is an integral part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. It is bounded by the protected area network of Nagarhole and Bandipur of Karnataka in the northeast and on the southeast by Mudumalai of Tamil Nadu. Wayanad district has the largest population of Adivasis or tribals in Kerala. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. Please look at this map. The Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary is located in Kerala and it is an integral part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. As you can see in this map, to the north of the Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary, we have the Rajiv Gandhi National Park, or also known as the Nagarhole National Park and Tiger Reserve in Karnataka. To the northeast, you have the Bandipur National Park and Tiger Reserve, and to the southeast, you have the Mudumalai National Park and Tiger Reserve in Tamil Nadu. The entire Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, comprising of these protected areas, is a critical habitat for elephants, tigers, and several other endangered species. Then other important protected areas that you can see in this map include the Brahmagiri Wildlife Sanctuary in the Coorg district of Karnataka, the Aralam Wildlife Sanctuary in the Kannur district of Kerala, the Mukurthi and Silent Valley National Park of Kerala, and all these protected areas are a part of the Western Ghats ecosystem. Then as the Nilgiris represent the confluence between the Western Ghats and the Eastern Ghats, you can see that as you move towards the east, you will encounter the BRT Tiger Reserve in the Chamarajnagar district of Karnataka, the Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary on the outskirts of Bengaluru, and over here you can even see the Satyamangalam Tiger Reserve, which is a crucial link between the Western Ghats and the Eastern Ghats. Because the Satyamangalam Tiger Reserve functions as a migratory corridor through which tigers and several other important fauna migrate between the Western Ghats and the Eastern Ghats. This question has been asked because on page number 8 we have a small article that refers to the death of an elephant in the Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis, or MP-IDSA, is India's foremost think tank for advanced research in international relations, especially defence, strategic and security issues. It is entirely funded by the Ministry of External Affairs. The President of the Executive Council is by convention an ex officio position held by the incumbent Foreign Minister. Defence and Foreign Secretaries also act as ex officio members. Amongst the given statements, the second and the third statements are incorrect. So the correct answer would be option D, 1 and 4 only. See, IDSA, which has been recently renamed after India's former Defence Minister Manohar Parrikar, is a leading think tank of India that is entirely funded by the Ministry of Defence, that develops advanced research in the field of international relations, national security, defence and other security related matters. The governing executive council of IDSA is headed by a president who happens to be India's defence minister, not the foreign minister. This is an ex officio position held by India's defence minister. Then, India's defence and foreign secretaries, they act as ex officio members to the executive council of IDSA. This government funded think tank is in news because according to this article on page number 10, the salaries of the employees and fellows of IDSA have been held up because of funding constraints which has arisen due to lower allotment provided by the Ministry of Defence. Now let's take up the next question. In the context of BREXIT, the possible re-emergence of a hard border exists in which region? The correct answer is option D, Northern Ireland. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2016 prelims paper. The European Stability Mechanism, sometimes seen in the news, is an agency of the EU that provides financial assistance to Eurozone countries. Option B is the right answer. This mechanism was in news a few years ago when the Eurozone countries were going through a massive financial and economic crisis. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, the convention of electing the deputy speaker from the opposition should be upheld. Discuss in the context of the current Lok Sabha. The second question, demand supportive fiscal policies alone can end the lockdown-induced economic slowdown. Critically evaluate. So kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.